Tonight, we travel back in time to a world where daily life was far stranger than you might imagine. Some of these habits may even surprise you. There's a book that's been studied for over 600 years, examined by the world's greatest cryptographers, analyzed by linguists from every major university, fed into artificial intelligence algorithms designed to crack any code. And despite all of this effort, despite centuries of attempts, no one has ever successfully read a single word. Or at least, that's what they tell us. The Voynich manuscript first appeared in recorded history in 1912, when a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich discovered it in a Jesuit college in Italy. But the manuscript itself is much older. Carbon dating places its creation somewhere between 1404 and 1438. For over 500 years before Voynich found it, this book existed in various collections, passed between scholars and collectors who were fascinated by what they couldn't understand. The manuscript is written in a script that doesn't match any known language. Not Latin, not Greek, not Arabic, not Hebrew, not any European or Asian writing system. The characters are unique, flowing, almost organic in appearance. They're grouped into what appear to be words, and those words form what appear to be sentences and paragraphs. Statistical analysis confirms it has the structure of language, letter frequency distributions, word length patterns, grammatical markers that suggest it's not random gibberish. But what language? No one knows. The illustrations are what make the manuscript truly unsettling. There are botanical sections showing plants that don't exist anywhere on Earth, not variants of known species, not stylized drawings of familiar flowers. Completely alien vegetation with root systems, leaves and blooms that have no correspondence to actual botany. Biologists have spent decades trying to identify even a single plant. They've all failed. There are astronomical diagrams, circular charts filled with symbols, and what might be zodiacal signs. But they don't match any known astronomical system. The number of celestial objects is wrong. The patterns don't correspond to how ancient or medieval scholars understood the cosmos. It's as if the author was describing a different sky. And then there are the figures. Human forms. Mostly women. Bathing in pools of green liquid. They're connected by networks of tubes and vessels, as if the drawings are showing some kind of biological or mystical circulation system. The anatomy is wrong. The proportions are strange. It looks like something glimpsed in a fever dream. Technically precise, but fundamentally alien. Here's where the Vatican connection becomes important. The manuscript was owned by Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, the same emperor who collected alchemical texts and employed John Dee. Rudolph believed the manuscript was written by Roger Bacon, the friar who predicted the future. Whether that's true remains unknown, but it reveals that people in positions of power took this text seriously. They didn't think it was a hoax. They thought it contained real knowledge, just encoded in a system no one could break. After Rudolph's death, the manuscript passed through various hands before ending up with Jesuit scholars. The Jesuits were the intellectual elite of the Catholic Church, trained in languages, mathematics, and cryptography. If anyone could decode the manuscript, it should have been them. They tried. Records indicate they spent decades attempting to crack it. And then, At some point, they gave up and stored it away. But did they really fail? Or did they succeed and decide the contents were too dangerous to reveal? The manuscript sat in Jesuit collections for centuries, accessible only to church scholars. If someone had decoded it during that time, would they have announced it? Or would they have quietly recorded their findings, sealed the documents, and left the world believing the manuscript was still indecipherable? Some researchers believe the manuscript is an elaborate hoax, created in the 15th century as a fake ancient text to be sold to wealthy collectors. But that theory has problems. The time and skill required to create such a sophisticated fake, with consistent internal logic and statistical patterns that mimic real language, seems excessive for a simple con job. And why would someone create botanical illustrations of plants that don't exist? Why invent an entire astronomical system that doesn't match anything? Another theory suggests it's written in a lost language, perhaps from a civilization we've forgotten. Or it's an artificial language, created by its author for reasons we can't understand. Or it's a code so sophisticated that even modern computers can't break it. Or maybe it's exactly what it appears to be. A book of knowledge written for someone else, not for 15th century Europeans, not for 20th century cryptographers, perhaps for someone who hasn't been born yet. Or perhaps for something that isn't human at all. The Voynich manuscript is famous because it's mysterious and beautiful. But there are other texts, less well known, that pose the same fundamental problem. They're written in languages that once meant something, that carried the thoughts and knowledge of entire civilizations. And then those civilizations fell. Their speakers died, and the meaning vanished with them. Take Etruscan. Before Rome became an empire, before it even became a republic, Italy was dominated by the Etruscans. They built cities, created sophisticated art, and developed religious practices that would heavily influence Roman culture. We have thousands of Etruscan inscriptions. We know what many of the words sound like because we can guess at pronunciation. But we can't read most of it. We've deciphered basic words, numbers, names, a few phrases. But religious texts, historical records, the actual substance of their culture remains locked in a script we can see, but not understand. The Vatican possesses Etruscan documents, acquired from tombs and archaeological sites over centuries. Some are religious texts, prayers or rituals carved into bronze tablets. If we could read them, we'd understand the spiritual worldview of a civilization that shaped Roman religion, which in turn shaped Christianity. But the key is missing. Or is it? What if there's a bilingual text somewhere, an Etruscan Latin Rosetta Stone that could unlock everything? What if the Vatican found one centuries ago during excavations and decided the contents were too sensitive to reveal? Then there's Linear A, the script used by the Minoan civilization on Crete during the Bronze Age. We've deciphered Linear B, a later script used by the Mycenaeans, because we realized it was an early form of Greek. But Linear A predates it, and we have no idea what language it represents. The symbols are clear. The tablets are preserved. We just can't read them. Those tablets contain administrative records, religious dedications, and possibly mythological texts from a civilization that thrived over 3,000 years ago. The Minoans were sophisticated. They built palaces with running water, created stunning frescoes, and traded across the Mediterranean. What did they believe? What stories did they tell? What knowledge did they preserve? It's all there, carved into clay, waiting for someone to remember how to read it. The Vatican has purchased collections from Mediterranean archaeological expeditions for centuries. Tablets, fragments, inscriptions in scripts no one remembers. Some were acquired legally through donations or sales. Others were confiscated from heretical groups during the Inquisition. Groups that claim to possess ancient wisdom, secret knowledge passed down from pre-Christian civilizations. Proto-Elamite is another lost script, used in ancient Iran before any writing system we can read. We have thousands of tablets. We know their administrative records, probably tracking goods and resources. But we can't decode the actual content. The numerical system is partly understood, but the words remain opaque. Here's the pattern that should concern you. We have texts in multiple dead languages. We know approximately what they are. Religious documents, historical records, astronomical observations. We know they contain knowledge from civilizations that influence the cultures we can read. But we can't access that knowledge because the linguistic key is missing. Or is it missing? Languages don't usually die without leaving traces. There are usually bilingual texts, inscriptions where someone wrote in two languages side by side. There are usually descendant languages that preserve fragments. The Rosetta Stone unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphics because it had the same text in 3 scripts, including Greek. What if the Vatican has similar bilingual texts for some of these lost languages? What if during centuries of archaeological collecting and confiscation from heretical groups, they acquired the keys that could unlock Etruscan religious texts or Linear A administrative records? They'd have good reasons to keep them hidden. Those texts might contradict biblical narratives. They might reveal that Christian practices were borrowed from earlier pagan religions. They might contain knowledge the Church has claimed as its own divine revelation. The languages aren't lost. The speakers are. But their words remain, carved in stone and clay, waiting for someone to remember how to listen. Ancient texts pose one kind of mystery, knowledge from the distant past that we can't access. But the Vatican also possesses something more unsettling: modern prophecies, predictions about the future, written by people the Church considers holy, sealed away not because the language is lost, but because the content is too dangerous to share. The most famous example is the third secret of Fatima. In 1917, 3 shepherd children in Portugal reported seeing the Virgin Mary. During these visions, they claimed Mary revealed 3 secrets. The first 2 were released relatively quickly. They predicted World War II and spoke of Russia's role in global affairs. But the third secret was different. It was written down, sealed in an envelope, and locked in the Vatican archives with specific instructions that it could only be opened after 1960. 1960 came and went. The Church remained silent. Decades passed. Speculation grew wild. What was in the third secret that required such secrecy? Some believed it predicted the assassination of a pope. Others thought it foretold the end of the Catholic Church itself. The most dramatic theories suggested it described apocalyptic events: nuclear war, the rise of the Antichrist, the end of the world. Finally, in 2000, the Vatican released what they claimed was the third secret. It described a vision of a pope being killed by soldiers, which the Church interpreted as referring to the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. Case closed. Mystery solved. Except many people, including some Catholic scholars and clergy, don't believe that's the complete text. The released version is too short, too vague, too anticlimactic after decades of absolute secrecy. Sister Lucia, the last surviving witness who wrote down the secret, made comments before her death suggesting the full text was longer and more disturbing than what was published. Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, read the sealed secret in the 1980s, and his reaction reportedly troubled those who saw him emerge from the archives. What did the real third secret say? What prediction was so disturbing that the Church kept it sealed for over 80 years and possibly still hasn't fully revealed it? But Fatima isn't the only sealed prophecy. The Vatican possesses letters from Padre Pio, the 20th century mystic who bore stigmata and reportedly performed miracles. Near the end of his life, he wrote letters to various church officials describing visions of the future. Some of these letters have been released. Others remain sealed. What did Padre Pio see that the Church won't share? Then there are the prophecies of Malachi, supposedly written by a 12th century Irish saint. The prophecies describe every pope from Malachi's time until the end of the world, identifying each with a short Latin phrase. Some of these phrases seem eerily accurate when matched to historical popes. The prophecies predict only a few more popes before a final pontiff called Peter the Roman, after which Rome will be destroyed and the Church will face judgment. Mainstream scholars dismiss the prophecies of Malachi as a 16th century forgery, not actually written by the medieval saint. But the Vatican has never definitively stated whether they possess the original document or explained why these prophecies, if they're obviously fake, continue to circulate and cause concern among the faithful. Here's the pattern. The Church possesses prophetic texts from mystics and visionaries it considers holy. It releases some predictions. The safe ones, the vague ones, the ones that can be reinterpreted to fit whatever happens. But it seals others, keeping them locked away with the same security given to heretical gospels and forbidden sciences. Why keep prophecies secret? If they're false, releasing them would prove they're meaningless when they fail to come true. If they're vague enough to be reinterpreted, they pose no danger. But if they're specific, disturbing, and potentially accurate, they become dangerous. Not because they might be wrong, but because they might be right. What future is described in those sealed documents? What did these mystics see that the Church decided humanity isn't ready to know? The Church kept records of everything. Every arrest, every interrogation, every torture session, every confession extracted under pain, every execution carried out in the name of God. For over 6 centuries, from the medieval period through the 19th century, the Catholic Church operated systematic tribunals across Europe designed to identify and eliminate heresy. They called it the Inquisition, and they documented it with bureaucratic precision that would make modern intelligence agencies envious. Most people have heard of the Spanish Inquisition, which operated from 1478 to 1834. It's become synonymous with religious persecution, torture, and fanaticism, but Spain was just one theatre. There were inquisitions in France, Italy, Portugal, and across Catholic territories. Each maintained its own records, and when these regional offices closed or were absorbed into Vatican authority, their documents were transferred to Rome. The archives contain trial transcripts, witness testimonies, descriptions of torture methods, and final judgments spanning centuries of systematic persecution. In 1998, the Vatican opened portions of the Inquisition records to scholars. It was presented as a gesture of transparency, an acknowledgement of dark history. Researchers gained access to thousands of files, and what they found was both worse and more complex than expected. Yes, there were horrific accounts of torture and execution, but there were also testimonies that revealed the actual beliefs and practices of the accused, voices that had been silenced but not completely erased. Scientists were tried for heresy because their observations contradicted scripture. Galileo is famous, but he wasn't alone. Dozens of natural philosophers, mathematicians, and physicians faced Inquisition tribunals for suggesting that the earth moved, that disease had natural causes, or that biblical chronology might be inaccurate. Their crime wasn't being wrong. Their crime was being right in ways that threatened church authority. Women were accused of witchcraft in staggering numbers. The records show that many of these women were healers, midwives, or herbalists, people who practice medicine outside church control. Their testimonies, recorded before torture began, describe herbal remedies, psychological counseling techniques, and medical procedures. After torture, these same women confessed to flying on broomsticks, attending demonic Sabbaths, and casting curses. The church accepted the tortured confessions and burned the women alive. But the earlier testimonies remain in the files, documenting medical knowledge that was condemned as demonic simply because it empowered people outside institutional authority. Jews and Muslims who converted to Christianity faced constant suspicion. The Inquisition targeted conversos and moriscos, people who had publicly converted, but were accused of secretly maintaining their original faiths. The evidence was often absurd: refusing to eat pork, lighting candles on Friday evening, or owning books in Hebrew or Arabic. Entire families were arrested based on accusations from neighbors or business rivals. The trials reveal the paranoia of a religious establishment that couldn't tolerate diversity, even in private thought. But here's where the records become something more than a catalogue of atrocities. They contain the full testimonies of heretical groups before those groups were wiped out. The Cathars, a Christian sect that flourished in southern France until they were exterminated in the 13th century, left almost no writings. Everything we know about their beliefs comes from Inquisition records. The Waldensians, the Fraticelli, various mystical movements that offered alternative interpretations of Christianity. They were destroyed so thoroughly that only their interrogation transcripts survive. What did these groups actually believe? What practices did they perform? What texts did they possess? The answers are in the Vatican archives, written in the words of people who knew they were about to die. Some of these testimonies describe rituals the church found threatening. Others mention ancient texts, secret teachings and knowledge passed down from earlier eras. The inquisitors recorded everything because they needed to identify and eliminate every trace of heresy. The chilling part is the precision. Every torture session was documented: how long, what methods, what the accused said at each stage. Every confession was transcribed, compared to previous testimonies, and analyzed for consistency. Every execution was scheduled, performed according to protocol, and filed away. The Inquisition wasn't chaotic violence. It was systematic elimination of dissent, carried out with forms and procedures and record-keeping that turns human suffering into administrative data. But vast portions of these records remain sealed. The 1998 opening was partial, carefully curated. Researchers can request specific trials if they know which ones to ask for. But browsing is restricted. Entire categories are off limits. Why? What's in the sealed files that's still too sensitive to release? 500 years after the people involved turned to ash, the church kept records of everyone they killed, which means they kept records of everyone who knew something the church didn't want spread. Those voices were silenced, but their words remain, locked away, waiting. On Friday, October the 13th, 1307, something unprecedented happened. Across France, in a coordinated operation that must have required months of secret planning, royal soldiers simultaneously arrested hundreds of Knights Templar. These weren't criminals or rebels. They were members of an elite military religious order that had protected Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land for nearly 2 centuries. They were the Church's warriors, the Pope's bankers, and one of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe. And overnight, they were declared heretics. King Philip IV of France orchestrated the arrest, but he had papal approval from Pope Clement V. The charges were spectacular. The Templars were accused of denying Christ, spitting on the cross during secret initiation ceremonies, worshipping a mysterious idol called Baphomet, and engaging in forbidden rituals that the accusations only hinted at. Under torture, some Templars confessed to these crimes. Others maintained their innocence, even as they were burned alive. Most historians believe the charges were fabricated. Philip was deeply in debt to the Templars, who had essentially become medieval bankers, in addition to their military role. By destroying the order and seizing their assets, he could eliminate his debts and claim their wealth. Pope Clement, politically weak and dependent on French support, went along with it. The confessions obtained through torture were unreliable. The whole thing was a power play, dressed up as religious purification. But there's a mystery the simple explanation doesn't quite cover. The Vatican possesses the complete trial records of the Templar persecution. For 700 years, these documents were sealed, classified as too sensitive for public access. Then, in 2007, the Vatican finally released portions of them, publishing a limited edition book called the Chinon Parchment that contained some of the trial transcripts. What's in the portions still sealed? Why did it take 7 centuries to release even partial records of trials that mainstream history considers politically motivated persecution of innocent men? Here's what made the Templars genuinely threatening, regardless of whether the specific charges were true. They had spent 200 years in the Holy Land, the crossroads of civilizations. They had access to ancient texts, Jewish mystical traditions, Islamic scholarship, and possibly artifacts and knowledge from even earlier eras. Jerusalem sits atop layers of history: Canaanite, Jewish, Roman, early Christian. What might the Templars have found in their excavations beneath Temple Mount, where they established their headquarters? They were also the church's bankers. which meant they knew exactly where money came from and where it went. They knew which church officials were corrupt, which political leaders were being paid off, and what financial arrangements kept the power structure intact. They possessed information that could destroy reputations and destabilize kingdoms, and they had established their own hierarchy, their own initiation rituals, and their own sense of identity separate from both secular and church authority. They answered only to the Pope, but they operated independently, building a network of fortresses, banks, and influence that spanned Europe and the Mediterranean. When the order was destroyed, all of their documents were supposed to be confiscated. Their libraries, their financial records, their ritual manuals, whatever texts they had collected in the Holy Land, everything was seized. Some of it ended up in royal treasuries. Some vanished, possibly hidden by Templars who escaped arrest, and some went to the Vatican archives. What's in those documents that required 700 years of secrecy? If the Templars were simply innocent victims of political persecution, their papers would show it. Banking records, religious devotions, military correspondence, nothing controversial. But if they really had discovered something in Jerusalem, if they really had developed secret knowledge or acquired ancient texts, those documents would be in the archives too. The trial records contain the testimonies of high-ranking Templars interrogated under torture. What did Grand Master Jacques de Molay say before he was burned at the stake? What did other Templar leaders reveal about what they'd found, what they knew, what they'd been initiated into? The Vatican knows. They've had the complete records for 7 centuries, and most of those records are still sealed. Here's a contradiction that should trouble anyone who thinks carefully about it. The Catholic Church has spent 2,000 years condemning magic, executing people accused of witchcraft, and declaring that occult practices are dangerous and demonic. And yet, the Vatican possesses one of the world's largest collections of grimoires, demonology texts, and occult manuscripts. They didn't just confiscate these materials and destroy them. They preserved them, catalogued them, and stored them in secure sections of the archives. Whenever the Inquisition arrested someone accused of witchcraft or sorcery, they confiscated everything. Books, amulets, ritual implements, handwritten notes. These items were supposed to be evidence of heresy, but after the trials concluded, after the accused were executed or pardoned, the materials weren't destroyed. They were archived. Century after century, the collection grew. The Vatican's occult library includes grimoires like the Lesser Key of Solomon, a medieval text that provides detailed instructions for summoning and commanding demons. It describes 72 demons, their appearances, their powers, and the specific rituals required to control them. The book includes precise drawings of magical circles, talismans, and symbols that supposedly protect the magician during invocations. There's the Sworn Book of Honorius, a 13th century grimoire that's particularly controversial because it's attributed to Pope Honorius III. Whether he actually wrote it is disputed, but the text claims to reveal divine names and angelic summoning techniques authorized by the Church itself. It blurs the line between acceptable prayer and forbidden magic in ways that made it deeply problematic for religious authorities. The collection contains books on necromancy, communicating with the dead. It includes astrological texts that claim to predict future events based on celestial movements. There are manuscripts on spellcasting, potion making, and ritual practices condemned as witchcraft. And some of these texts were written by clergy themselves, priests and monks who practiced magic in secret, believing it could lead to divine knowledge or hidden truths about creation. The official explanation for why the Church preserved these texts is straightforward. They studied them to better understand and combat heresy. Inquisitors needed to know what accused witches and sorcerers were allegedly doing. Exorcists needed to understand demonic hierarchies to properly cast out demons. The texts were dangerous, yes, but they were educational tools for those authorized to use them. But that explanation only goes so far. The Church has maintained this collection for centuries, long after the Inquisition ended, long after witch trials became historical embarrassment. They continue to restrict access, requiring special permissions that few scholars receive. Why preserve something dangerous if you're not going to use it? And here's the uncomfortable part. The Church still performs exorcisms. They have official protocols, trained exorcists in every diocese, and a formal rite that was updated as recently as 1999. These exorcism manuals contain detailed instructions for identifying demonic possession, specific prayers and rituals for casting out demons, and warnings about how demons behave and respond. If the Church believes demons are real enough to require official procedures, what else in their occult collection might they consider genuinely dangerous rather than merely historical curiosity? There are texts in the Vatican archives that claim to contain working magical systems, rituals that supposedly produce tangible effects. Some were confiscated from people executed for using them. Others were written by scholars the Church respected. The Vatican has had centuries to test these texts privately to determine if any of the claims have merit. What did they discover? What works and what doesn't? What's genuinely dangerous and what's superstition? The world's largest religious institution possesses the world's largest collection of forbidden magic. They've kept it secret, kept it safe, and kept it close. The question isn't why they collected it. The question is why they still have it. Why keep something you claim is evil unless you believe there's power in it worth controlling?